She swam in the clear ocean of the tropics, enjoying her snorkeling vacation. The young woman looked to be in her 20s, Japanese, long black hair, and she wore a black swimsuit. She floated over a coral reef that interested her. She took a deep breath and duck dived down to the waiting reef. What she saw took her breath away. A large field of colorful coral and equally color aquatic wildlife that dwell within it. Then something strange happened. This beautiful scene that she was observing seemed to glitch, as if she was watching the whole event on a TV screen. She waited for a while, seeing if it would happen again, but nothing happened. When nothing happened, she moved on, not giving it a second thought. After some time of observing the aquatic life and the breathtaking beauty, she floated on her back on the surface of the water, relaxing, eyes closed, and listening to the peaceful soundscape. Then it happened again. That same glitch she had came across earlier, only this time, it didn't just glitch once and disappear. It persisted. Then it got worse. As the glitches progress, colors became dark-like out of a horror movie, and then complete darkness. All she could hear was the sound of being underwater and the sound of her own heartbeat. Her eyes suddenly snapped open with surprise, and for some reason she wasn't able to move. She didn't know where she was, and what scared her the most was that she didn't know who she was. The last thing she remembered was being in the tropics, floating on the water surface. Now it seems that she's floating in some kind of cylindrical glass tank, like a goldfish in a bowl. She could barely make out what was outside her watery environment. The combination of the glass tank and its contents blurred and distorted her vision. But she was able to see that she was in some kind of large circular room. It had an ominous green lighting with a pulsing white light mixed in. She saw 5 other chambers, and all were occupied with an individual. Because of the distortion effect of both the glass chamber and the water that is part of her prison, she couldn't identify who they were. They were nothing but shadows. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, 2 distinctive sets. The one that stood out sounded heavy metallic, amplified by the metal decking it was walking on. They were getting closer and closer. Then they stopped as 2 shadowy figures appeared in front of her chamber, distorted by her prison.
The subject is awake. Any reason for this?
Unknown, Master. The digital environment we created should have kept the subject docile while the process is active.
What about the other subjects?
Same results. It seems that these humans are far more resilient than we thought.
Will they survive the process now they are awake?
Yes, although they will experience extreme discomfort.
As long as they survive, it doesn't matter. Proceed.
Yes, Master.
There was a pause. Then she felt a strange tingling sensation throughout her body, which then turned into pins and needles. With every passing second, that same sensation seems to slowly intensify, becoming more and more uncomfortable. A red energy starts to spark and arc around her body. She could hear the rhythm of her own heartbeat increase in speed. She suddenly felt a sharp and agonizing pain, as if every bone in her body was being snapped. One by one, then being healed, only to be broken again, over and over again. The rhythm of her heartbeat increased even more in speed. She screamed in agony, but the oxygenated fluid that had flooded her lungs prevented her from making any sound. In the end, the pain got too much for her and she slowly passed out while the process continued. When she regained consciousness, she had no idea how much time had passed. Her whole body felt as though she had been run over by a freight train. She was still unable to move. She was still in her fluid environment, and her 2 tormentors were still observing her from the shadows.
Phase 1 of augmentation completed. All 6 subjects are stable.
Very resilient indeed. Proceed with Phase 2.
As you command, Master.
She felt the same warm and tingling sensation, and she knew what that meant, so she braced herself for the incoming storm. The first thing she noticed when she regained consciousness, things felt different for her. The sensation of being submerged underwater was no longer present, and she could hear clearly. She shivered as she felt the cold from no longer being surrounded by the life-giving warmth of the tank's environment. The second thing she noticed was that she was able to move as she instinctively curled up into a ball, trying to keep herself warm. She slowly opened her eyes. The fluid within her chamber had been drained, and the cylinder started to retract into its base. She slowly climbed down from the chamber base on all fours and very gingerly stood up. She looked around and saw the 5 other chambers and their still imprisoned occupants and floating in their watery environment, 3 males and 2 females. She walked up to one of them to get a better look, slowly and deliberately, her body still weak, her long wet hair hanging down and partially covering her face that had a look of fatigue. She wrapped her arms around herself, still trying to keep herself warm and not noticing the changes that had been made to her body. She caught her reflection in the surface of the glass tank and noticed something strange with her eyes. They had a faint red glow behind them. She brought a hand up as if she was going to touch it. It was then she noticed what her captors had done to her. Both of her arms, from her shoulder to her hands, had been replaced with robotic limbs. She was horrified as she looked them over, trying to understand what has happened to her. Her new robotics looked streamlined, elegant, and gunmetal in color. She also noticed that they had a very convincing tactile response. She could feel every touch as she continued to inspect her new limbs. She then decided to check the rest of her body to see what else was done to her. Her torso and from the waist down were normal, but both her legs had been replaced with the same elegant robotics and in the same gunmetal color. She then turned her attention back to the chamber and its occupant. This one had also had his limbs replaced. He looks to be in his mid-20s, European black military-style haircut, 6 feet tall, muscular, and yet somehow familiar. Suddenly, the man awoke with a shock, eyes wide open with abject fear on his face, and he has that same red glow behind them. She looked over the chamber, seeing if there was a way to free him from his prison. Suddenly, the traumatic process began again. All 5 chambers started to power up. She saw the young-faced man twist and contort with pain as his whole body is surrounded by arcing red energy. She frantically looked for the mechanisms that could free him. When she couldn't, she looked at her own robotic hands and arms. She turned one of her hands into a fist. She pulled her arm back, ready to drive it through the glass tank, when suddenly...
Stop!
She stopped in mid-drive, startled as she recognized that electronic voice, the voice of one of her tormentors. She slowly turned to face the one who had done this to her. A tall cybernetic figure, wearing a large heavy cloak, stood before her, its red cybernetic eyes glowing in the shadow casted by the cloak's large hood.
If you interrupt the process at this stage, you'll more than likely kill him, and the process cannot be stopped. There's nothing you can do for them. I can see that you have many questions, but I had only enough time to free you before the process began again. And it won't be long before my masters notice that there are 5 chambers active, not 6. We need to leave this place, follow me.
She hesitated, not sure if she trusts this person, the same one who was her tormentor. But if what he said is true, she didn't have time for indecisions. She quickly followed behind him, exited the room, and into an elevator. On the ride up, she thought it would be the right time to ask some questions to this stranger. But the stranger beat her to it.
Before you ask me any questions, which I know you have, I'll need you to hold out your right hand in front of you.
Again, she hesitated, not sure of his motives, and the cybernetic figure sensed it.
You've trusted me this far. You can trust me on this.
She nodded and held out her right hand. A blocky mechanical hand came out from under his robes and holding a small strip of metal. He slapped it on her wrist, and it snapped itself around it. She spoke for the first time after being free from her fluidic prison.
What is it?
Watch.
He tapped its surface with one metal digit. She watched as a digital light moved up her arm, leaving some kind of white light behind it. It then traveled across her neck, chest, down the other arm and both hands. Then it moved down her torso, waist, both legs and feet. For a second, her whole body from the neck down was glowing with the brilliance of a supernova. When the light faded, she found herself wearing some kind of body-hugging flight suit that had adapted to her bionics, a black and white affair with flashes of red and a number 6 on her chest. She looked over her new outfit and smiled. She then turned her attention back to her once tormentor and now her savior.
My first question is, who are you?
If you are referring to my original name, I do not know. The Strax had taken everything that I was away from me, as they have done to you, but you can call me Vox.
The Strax?
Conqueror of worlds. A plague of being that uses a select few from worlds they wish to conquer, and use them as their generals after they've been converted. The same process that you've just experienced. If I have not taken you out at this stage, you would have been under their full control. The process not only enhances your body, it also takes away everything that makes you who you are. Your morals, empathy, your humanity, and all you'll care about is serving your Strax masters.
But yet you managed to break free from the control. How?
To be honest, I'm not quite sure myself. I've regained most of who I am a week ago, but not much. It could be that my species have certain regenerative qualities that allowed the conversion to slowly reverse. But what species I am, I couldn't tell you.
Where are we going?
Hangar Bay. While your transformation was in progress, I took the liberty in preparing your means of escape.
Escape? In what?
The elevator slowly came to a full stop and the doors open.
In this.
What she saw was a starship.
This is an old long-range cargo vessel that the Strax captured from their last conquest. Its last owner had heavily modified it, and it had its own working AI to aid you. It's fully fueled and armed, and your warrior is on board.
My what?
Before Vox could explain, they were suddenly startled by the sound of klaxons going off and flashing red strobes.
They've discovered you're missing. You need to get on board and leave.
What about you?
You'll need time to get away. I need to make sure that the Strax won't be able to send a retrieval squad after you.
But they will kill you or recondition you.
They will not have the opportunity to do so. I'll make sure of that. And when I die, I'll die free.
She had a look of sadness on her young face. She cupped one side of his metallic face with a suited hand, which caused the red glow of his cybernetic eyes to dim, as if to simulate his own sadness.
You must go and defend your planet. A dark storm is coming and it's called the Strax.
She gave him a knowing look and headed towards the awaiting vessel. Vox watched her run towards it and towards her freedom. She entered the vessel and ran down its corridor, her boots echoing off the metal decking. She was stopped by a set of heavy blast doors, which then parted with the sound of hydraulics and electric motors to reveal the command center. She only took a brief second to look at her new surroundings and what will be her new home. A basic U-shape setup with touchscreen interfaces and a single command chair at its center. Suddenly, the vessel engines began to power up, obviously a response to her presence. She quickly sat in the command chair, resting her robotic hands on its armrests. She looked at one of its small displays, noticing that the ship's AI had already set coordinates into its navigation computer and was ready to go to hyperspace once they were clear of wherever they were. As for Vox himself, he watched the vessel slowly rise off the deck a few feet as it waited for the hangar's heavy-duty blast doors to part. There was a sound of a containment force field being activated, and the blast doors began to open, revealing open space. It wasted no time surging forward, through the containment field, out into the unknown, and to freedom. Vox headed back to the elevator, and he prepared to give her the time she'll need, knowing that this could mean the end of him, and he was happy with that, because for the first time in his enslavement, he knew that he had given the Earth a fighting chance, and her name is 6.